Hi everybody. 'Tis the season to get games. I hope everybody got a ton of games, a whole huge haul of games. I certainly did. I put out recently the last video, probably. This one right here, a video all about what I brought back from PAX. And at this point, I've almost played all of them, which is an incredible feat in itself. Yes, I will pat myself on the back. But I figured this was a great opportunity to revisit this video. Essen Halls, or board game halls. This is a table talk back video where we're going to cover the concept of board gaming halls. If you missed the original, go check it out. Table talk is a format that I stole from Rodney Smith while I won it in a back alley duel. And it's where I pick a topic about the board gaming hobby, I share my initial thoughts, and then I provide a follow-up video including a bunch of comments from you all. And that way, to quote a phrase that I just came up with right now, we can all participate in the conversation. I think it's great. I think it's great to be able to participate in this conversation and to be able to have a discussion and a conversation about buying habits. And what better time than after Christmas, after you've just been plied with games. And maybe that actually changes the conversation a little bit about it too. I don't know. So I talked in the last video about the idea of board gaming halls and the really sizable ones that you sometimes see on social media. Social media is bad, basically was my thesis. And more so that there is this sort of mentality that propels us to purchase so many things at a time. And I was wondering about the reasoning behind that and trying to examine my own buying habits or my own collecting habits in the process. And so I brought back 17 games from PAX, and some of them really hit, some of them don't hit. Reviews for all of them will be upcoming. I brought those back because it's kind of my job to be informed and give you my thoughts and opinions about games. But even still, I was stressed. I was stressed about taking that many games back. I was stressed about the space that I have. I was stressed about a lot of things, the time that it would take for me to get them off the shelf. I was quite stressed. And that was only with 17 games and not 80 of them. And so I figured we might as well check in and see how you all felt about the concept of board gaming halls, if they're good or bad for the hobby, if there's something that we should continue to pursue. I like them as videos. I do, because they give you little mini snippets of why something might be exciting. But I feel like there's often more than that happens. And I think a lot of that has to do with the concept of the cult of the new, right? As Sorarivers says. Honestly, I used to love this sort of stuff back when I entered the hobby about 2 years ago, but I'm going to be honest. I somewhat destroyed my new love for myself a little by getting swept up in the consuming nature of the currently persisting culture mentality of having to gobble up tons of board games. I've gotten rid of dozens of board games since I started, but even now there's just a lot of games on my shelf I hold no love for, or I just get mixed feelings whenever I look up at my board game. It almost feels like having a bunch of merch and figurines of TV shows and video games you don't particularly care for or have a decent enough feeling about. I'm sure I'm going to get rid of more games at some point when I figure a healthy home for them to go. I'd rather not sell them, I'd rather spread them out and get others into the hobby, or have this new little other facet of my life to enjoy from time to time. But I really miss the days of looking at my shelf and just being thoroughly in love with my copy of Minecraft Builders and Biomes, Summer Camp, Parks, Backwoods, etc. I think these sorts of videos are good for people, like you said, like Dice Tower, Watch It Played, and other channels and reviewers across different platforms who sustain their livelihood off such content. But for the general consumer, I just feel like it dilutes our passion and fills our lives and hearts up with bloat that is unneeded. Humans love new shinies. We know that from all the foil that's up there at Kickstarter. This is nothing new. It's a great way to make content that gets traffic and to enjoy something on a superficial level. True. Here, this is just right here, this is a comment about the idea of creating content and how it's, not sustainable to just make the same content around the same board game over and over and over again. Suddenly, your audience will get bored, right? They'll get tired if you don't do it correctly, and a lot of people don't. But I just feel like this is a consequence of living in a culture that values new and excess over what is limited and worn in, but well-loved. And then there's an edit. Honestly, if you're going to shell out big money to get new games, I'd just say buy expansions for your most well-loved ones, and even just deluxify them. Get sleeves. Well, okay, that's a bit serious. Replace those water tokens with plastic water droplets. Replace components with even more quality ones. I've done this for a couple specific board games. Ones I even made my own mini expansion for with homebrewed rules and everything. Focus that attention back into the stuff you actually love instead of just getting new things. It's bound to make you happier and make more of a statement with friends and family to gain insight into who you are and what you truly love. And so there's a lot of really interesting and exciting things about that comment, right? Or insightful things, I should say. Not really exciting. But here I feel is a real key point. I miss the days of looking at my shelf and just being thoroughly in love with my copy of Minecraft Builders. And this is something that I have really been pushing for myself, for my own personal collection, is being able to look at a shelf and not feeling meh about any of them. Right? There are too many good board games out there to be able to look at a shelf and feel meh. And it's that idea of qualifying our excitement or evaluating our excitement for these various things. The idea that pushes me to produce culling videos and purge videos and what's leaving the collection. And I get great joy of getting things now off of my shelf where I didn't used to. And I think it's because I am searching for that hit again, that curation aspect. It's one thing to make board games, you know, the only part of your personality that you care about. That's something that I have done, especially over the last few years. But I love that concept of if you're inviting somebody over to see your shelves and to see your board game collection, you're sharing something of yourself with them, right? You're sharing an aspect of yourself. And you can be sharing, hey, I'm an omni gamer, I love games, look at all the games I have. Or you can curate it and you can be sharing a distinct slice of yourself with someone. And that second option, that idea of being able to share more of myself with someone, being able to have somebody know me a little bit more intimately because of my tastes and preferences, I don't know, that kind of excites me. It excites me a lot more than having just a swath of board games that if they ask to play, I'm not going to be actively excited to do. And I think this idea of these huge hauls perpetuates that. I think I've played 10 out of the 17 games that I got for Essen right now. And I'm filming this, 4 or 5 days after filming the other one. It's great. My good friend Zach came over. We plowed through a bunch of the ones that only take 30 minutes to play. But out of those, I would be surprised if I held on to more than 50%, right? And so that curation and that idea of the haul and that idea of purchasing just to sell and go through those motions rather than being more distinct consumers and more defined consumers and not letting ourselves get swept up in that buying cycle, I think is important to think about. That being said, it isn't always about the new hotness. As MrBart says, I haven't been to Essen in the last few years, but in the past it has always been mostly for shopping. There were always a lot of vendors selling last year's or older titles at really reduced prices. The fact that I only lived 2 hours away and went to Essen by car made it even more convenient. Yeah, I totally don't think that people are bringing 80 games home in suitcases with them. That would be wild. Really, really wild. I drove specifically to PAX in case there were games that I wanted to pick up and bring back with me. But even this comment of there always being a lot of vendors selling last year's or older titles at really reduced prices is indicative of the sort of buying cycles that was just talked about in the last comment. The focus on the new, it's always about the new, always about the new. And when you are purchasing so many games at a time, how much are you neglecting the things that got you into the hobby in the first place? The things that you actively want to share and play with people? The things that are in your top 10, how much of that gets neglected when you have these other responsibilities? This was also around the time of people calling out for Dice Throne 5 Reasons in the comments. And this is sort of a timely comment as well in terms of what I was just saying. Robscarpelli says, I do fall in the category of having too many games. I like that start. I do fall in that category. I have about 300 games, but about 60% are small card games and another 15% small dice games, with the rest being light to mid-weight board games. So 100 big size boxes and then a ton of little card games sort of crammed in behind. I say that as I find it's easier to table these types of games and play them more often than games that are all-day events. Absolutely agree. Having said that, I do enjoy the hunt and collection aspect of this hobby, just slightly less than playing of said game. I have other hobbies, and I enjoy the research, watching the reviews, understanding the game before I even purchase, and that's part of the enjoyment. I never let myself get in front of my skis, so to speak, making purchases I could not afford. However, the issue for me is space. With my other hobbies, physical space becomes less of an issue. Not so with board games unless you continue to cycle through. However, there is a realization through time in the hobby that just one more game isn't going to do anything for my contentment. The flip side is I never want to lose that desire to learn something new, appreciate a new design, compete in a new way, keep the brain fresh. However, the balance is how well do you get to know a game if you do broad brush strokes and play something 5 times versus 25 times, and with a large collection, it's harder to do a deep dive. So there's 2 really interesting things that I'm sure Rob is not alone in because, well, I am sure because I feel it myself. The concept of enjoying the research, enjoying the reviews, I can absolutely resonate with that because that's why I enjoy doing Crowdfunding Countdown every Monday. I get to see what's coming out. I get to read through the rule books. I get to work through the mechanics of it and imagine and visualize what that game will be like to play and see how it excites me, right? That process for me is now almost equal to playing a game. It feels very similar. It feels like I'm scratching those same mechanical itches in my brain by absorbing this information. But then also when you get into the hobby for a long time, and I guess this does have to do with hauls. I was thinking maybe it has to do more with collection size, but they feel pretty intertwined. The idea that one more game isn't going to do anything to my contentment is sort of a sad thing when you think about it, or at least it's a sad thing for me. It's like an addict, right? At first, getting a new game and punching out the pieces, that's the hit. And then you slowly become numb to that, and you need to have 3 games. You need to have a trilogy of games. And then you become numb to that, and you need to have a whole haul. And I can only assume that these escalating tendencies of larger and larger hauls are people chasing that high, chasing that itch, and chasing that discovery. Right? Because it represents new discovery. And I think with games, what is really exciting to me is that whenever I see uniqueness, whenever I see people innovating in the genre, that's what gets me excited. And it's harder to do. The more and more you're into something, the more you've seen the tricks, right? The tricks still might be enjoyable and fine, but there's not something super special. And I think that maybe that's how these hauls come to be. I put out my PAX haul as like a, hey, I got these games for Christmas sort of video because my family and loved ones don't buy me games for Christmas anymore because I have too many. And when that started happening, that made me sad. But it makes complete sense, and I don't want them from my friends and family. But it still makes me sad to think about that those sort of highs that I was chasing before are kind of diluted when you have a large collection or when you deal in this idea of excess. That's not something I think we should ever strive for. I think we should strive for when we get a game, one single game, that's exciting because we can open it and we can explore and we can experience that game. And I think we kind of fall into this trap of, okay, on to the next one, on to the next one, on to the next one. And this idea of pushing through the numbers, which I certainly have fallen into since starting the YouTube channel. And perhaps I'll give myself a little bit of a pass because I have been aggressively consuming board games and new board games for the channel, like as work. I have put aside games that I want to continue to play, and I have chosen the new ones consciously in order to be more knowledgeable for the channel and for you all and for my job. And that's just like, hey, people got to work, right? But through that and through that constant acquisition and that constant hunt for the new, I think it's possible to lose the joy of our favorites. So maybe that's a New Year's resolution for you. Wait for all the Kickstarters to get delivered and don't buy anything new this year, or buy it one at a time rather than these giant things. See, Blue has the right idea, always in awe of haul photos and videos. When I went to Essen, I got 1 game and 1 expansion. I didn't realize until I got back to the US that some games were only available in the EU. Maybe talking about that Masters of the Universe weird crossover. When I went to PAX Unplugged, I bought 2 games and 1 expansion. At the time, Ticket to Ride Europe was sold out, and picking it up there was my only option. I also know that some games aren't available in all countries, so getting at a convention is the only option. And that's a fair point. Getting these hauls when you have the chance, if you don't have access to games or shipping is ridiculous, it makes sense to actively do all of your purchasing one at a time, or all together rather than parceling it out one over time and paying a ton more in shipping. I understand that with the savings, but I also feel like I know there are some people out there who just, you kind of justify it. You justify it that way, and you know that you're not actually doing it for that because you're not excited enough to pick it up and add it to the collection, right? And here's an interesting idea too, that idea of the amount of research that you can do before purchasing. AAA Strike 91 says, I bought about 10 small games at Essen Spiel this year. Most of them are from Asian publishers and they are harder to get in Europe. I'm quite proud of myself that I decided to wait for more reviews to come in for all the hot games this year instead of getting them at Essen Spiel. This, I think, is huge as well. The point of marketing is to get people excited and talking about the game. But so many of those games don't last the test of time, right? So many of those games fizzle out in a year and don't rise to the cream of the crop. And you can choose to either be an alpha tester or a beta tester. You know, you can choose to let other people do that heavy lifting for you. And if the game is good, you don't have to slurp up every single board game in existence because maybe it'll be great. I mean, you can if you enjoy it. Again, this isn't to shame anybody or anybody's buying habits. It's just to be sort of reflective upon my own and the idea of overconsumption. Gluttony, some might say. Bunny has a great point. I've been accruing games for the past 3 years. This month I had 2 Kickstarters deliver, 3 secondhand games, and 1 from a trip abroad. It's daunting. I can't fit them in my cupboard. It's my limit. These are all games I've been excited for since I knew they existed. Townsfolk Tussle, Senjutsu, but it feels a bit like buying lots of fancy cheeses only to find there's no space in the fridge and you have to eat a whole block or portion every day so they don't expire before they are wasted. I like to mull games for a few months before getting them. Can't do that if they're new. Again, that commenting on the cycle, the newness, the fact that there are too many games vying for your attention and too many great games that are now coming out every year. No, too many good games, too many very good games. Games are inherently fun. I say that all the time because I believe it. But if we took everything, we would be living in boxes. And I think that pressure, that idea, I don't know how people can find enjoyment with those sort of like 80, 60 game hauls, because it feels like a lot of pressure. I have games still on my shelf of shame. It's just creating a whole room of shame, right? I have games that I've actively wanted to play and to learn that I haven't. And every time I look at the shelf, it then becomes a project, a bit of homework now, instead of an excitement. Because when you're spoiled for choice, it becomes this, at least for me, it becomes this list of just getting through it, instead of relishing and enjoying. So there is that, if you have that wide availability, right? Iced Hammer, again, is reinforcing that idea that sometimes it's a lot more expensive to get them where you are, and you make your purchases and then you're done. And I think that's also fine, right? It makes sense. The first is the option to try a game before you buy it, and second, coming from a small country, usually getting the games here is much more expensive than getting it locally. Getting the games here being at a convention, right? There's a lot of emphasis too on big hauls and getting them in trade or an auction. My biggest hauls are about 15 games, but I get them in trade and auction, so I have about 10 games going out at the same time, and it's not as expensive. I wouldn't feel good about myself if I was getting so many games full price. I like good deals, and I like to call my collection too. Yeah, the idea that conventions are expensive, right? I'm still going to buy Septima, and I almost bought it at PAX because it was there. And then I saw that it was being sold for $65 US, and I can get it for like 62 Canadian at my local store. And I thought, well, what? Why would I do this? There are ways to get deals, right? There are ways for stores to have sales. There are ways for you to get things secondhand, to try before you buy, to do an exchange with your own games for somebody else's. There's lots of math trades that are organized in major cities or organized through shipping, where you put in a game and it spits out a game that you really want. And the flow of that feels nicer to me, you know? Maybe it's that process of going out and coming in. You have to create space somewhere, but I like focusing on that idea as well, that there isn't only one way to get a whole chunk of board games. You can get it in other ways too, and what those ways mean and how those ways are able to sustain your excitement. Because I think that's what the thesis of this table talk back is. How do we sustain our excitement? How do we make sure that we're not purchasing in excess just to purchase, but we're purchasing because it will fulfill us, because it will bring us great enjoyment? And how do we check ourselves from becoming too much of an addict that one game isn't enough of a hit, that you need 20? I also say this as somebody who sells their games in bundles, right? I've sold a couple of bundles of games to get them out of my house. I price it at a price that is very good, not proportional to the value of the games in it, but it is worth that to me to sell it quickly, to get it out the door, and then I can chuck in a few copies of the Night Cage because I have to go through 50 of them since all my patrons chipped in and bought me a pallet. No, they didn't. But I know one day it will happen, and I'm just steeling myself for that. And for some people, it's perfectly great, and this is the way that it brings them joy. I love this comment by jannickloffel, who says, I somehow accumulated 700 plus games over the last 10 years. So 70 a year. One of those Essen halls a year. I love to sit in the middle of my library, eat a sandwich, and choose the next game to play. I'm lucky to have multiple gaming groups and a big family to play games with, so all couple years I play them at least once. That's really impressive. 700, 365 times 2, you can play them, you play a game a day average. That's your evening plan. You can get through them, definitely. I love that image of sitting in the library, looking around, smiling, happy, bringing joy, and that feels like a very lovely thing. And I think a lot of people chase that too, right? I think the idea of getting into the board gaming hobby and getting board game halls are because you feel your collection is somehow lacking, or you want that image. I know when I first started realizing the potential of the board gaming world, it snowballs, right? I was going out every week to pick up a couple games that I found on Kijiji for a good price. I can remember every single place in the city, every single house that I went to pick up a game and which game. Maybe that's just because I catalog things in my head like that. But I think that has to do somehow with level of excitement for it. And I think the ones that I forget where I got them, those are the ones that tend to leave. Because they weren't done with thought or intention, I suppose. So I think we've pretty much covered the general sense, the general responses of the comments. But I'll finish with this one from AlanRyker, who says, I don't care about board game halls. I'm part of some vintage toy groups, and those halls are really interesting, and somehow I feel very happy for people who get a bunch of hard-to-find stuff for good prices. Yeah, of course. That sounds incredible. Seeing a stack of new board games, I don't get the appeal. I almost didn't click on yours, except for the parasocial aspect where I would feel happy for you if you were happy because I feel like I know you. I like you too, Alan. I do. Because of the thumbnail of my big haul with everything in the background, right? As a very expensive hobby, I find sharing hauls to be gaudy, but other people seem to really like seeing other people's hauls, so that probably balances out in the positive. I don't inherently have an issue with board game collecting. As a natural-born collector, I constantly battle this impulse because I do think it can counterintuitively conflict with the hobby of playing games in the way you mentioned, by not letting you get deeper into the games you really love. I want to find more games I love, but it is a process that can be tilted too far when the collector impulse gets added. Tangential to this conversation, I started hanging out in a lot of game-specific groups for games I love, rather than the big general game groups, so that I dig deeper into fan content and discussion and avoid some of that never-ending FOMO. I get a haul of 5 games or so a few times a year from Game Nerds, when my customer holds of deals build up until I've purchased more than the free shipping threshold. That's the way to do it. It's very exciting to receive. I think it's objectively a good idea to buy a bunch of games I know I want at a bargain and then shop my own shelves later. But I also have to admit that picking which game I'll play on the day they arrive is more exciting than grabbing one from my shelf later. This is the point that I really wanted to talk about, and I think is a wonderful idea, is if you're feeling that same push, that same rush of all these hauls, those are some things you'll find in large board game groups, but not something you'll ever probably find in a very specific thing of a game that you enjoy. And so the idea, like, I've joined a bunch of board game Facebook groups. My Facebook is now basically all board games because I've shunned everybody else from my life. But I see people posting pictures and posting games, and it all starts to sound a little bit of like the same, you know? People wanting to share these specific things, and I don't think ever really getting the engagement that they want in response. No, it's the internet, right? So of course somebody will chime in about why they think their post is stupid, and then someone else will chime in and say, be quiet, just let them have fun, but not actually engage in the topic of the actual post. And I think it's a lot. I think that idea of getting board game specific groups is a really great one. I think I was flooded with that sort of generica, and we can be flooded with that generica, that shower of board games, that beautiful golden shower of board games, and kind of forget. And I think that definitely contributes to the numbness. But by really being purposeful and investigating and choosing to immerse ourselves in the things that we like, well, hey, maybe it'd be a bit different. So I think we'll finish on that, or we'll finish on Legolas GB saying, I have a confession. I'm a board game hoarder. Forgive me, Father Chris. Forgive me. Hey, you know what? You're doing your best. I think you're doing your best, but really get rid of them all. You sinner! We're all doing our best out here. We're all trying to participate and engage in this hobby that we love, that we decide to spend our free time consuming content about and having discussions about, and just talking about things that we enjoy. And hopefully we can push away any of the excess stuff of the hobby and get back to the thing that really matters at hand. Pretending to like board games, like this person, Boardgamiko, Boardigam Eco, says, my main takeaway from this video was that you don't even like board games. That's true. I hate them. Well, I don't like other people having board games. That's the real thing. I want to have board games, and I want them to be just for me. That's the real reason why I tell you all not to back anything, because I want it. I want the only copy and drive the value up. Anyway, drop down in the comments if this retrospective sparked anything for you. I like continuing the conversation. For me, it's going to be hard, but I'm going to be and stay excited about those Kickstarters that I ordered. That will arrive one at a time. And when they arrive, I will be actively excited to open them and explore them and try to prioritize to get them to the table. And so that's kind of a fun thing. Maybe that's a New Year's resolution for me. Who knows? Anyway, my name's Chris George. I wish I had a catchphrase, but I don't. I don't have a catchphrase. But I wish you all a wonderful, hopefully some time off this holiday season, and hopefully some great games, new and old.